Subscribe now and press the bell icon. Never miss an update.
The most important and the basic building block of a great, productive, effective finance function is the bookkeeping function. Finance also is your companion in the journey. At every step, at every moment, they are there to nag you, they are there to remind you that there is this unpopular guy who is going to ask you questions on why you are spending money. So you are at that exciting point in your life when you have either started something just now or you are about to start something. It's a very important step, a small step, but a very defining step. I think one of the important things that we all are gunning towards, and when we start what we are going to start, is to eventually give a return to all our stakeholders. Investors are going to put in money in your business. I'm sure you would like them to put money in your business. And when you think about why they will make an investment, it is effectively expecting a return on their investment. We all know that when we want to get to a certain point, when we have a goal and we are aspiring to achieve something in life, we need to know what that is. We need to know how we will get there. We need to know what all we need to do to get there. If one of the key objectives of an enterprise, which is what all of you want to build, is to eventually give a financial return to your investors, then getting that financial return is a goal. What all you need to do to make sure that you are able to deliver to that goal, that your investors are happy with the return that they get, and how you will get there is nothing but the subject matter of what we all know as finance. So finance is many a times misunderstood as just a Munimji sitting in an office and keeping records of all transactions. Finance is essentially a function which encompasses everything that is happening in the organization which relates to money, and very clearly delivering to the investors will require your understanding of what all is happening in the money world. So that is what finance is. I get asked this question many times, that while finance is important and while delivering to money and creating wealth is important, but do startups need to worry about it? Let's all accept the fact and let's all understand that in our journey to get to where we want to be, whether it is trying to solve a problem, whether it is about serving a certain section of the community, whether it is well-being of humanity, eventually we all need support, financial support of people who have that resource. And the only reason why they would do it, or the primary reason why they would provide that support, will be in expectation of a return that your enterprises will create. And if startups have that objective too, then you better worry about finances as well. Some of you are engineers, some of you are marketing people, some of you may be finance experts as well. So like a finance expert will probably know what finance is, but will have to pick up understanding of marketing and engineering if they have to build a business and they have to know their product. I'm pretty sure that similarly, a marketing or an engineering person need to understand finance if they have to deliver to that goal of the business. Hence, finance is as important and as critical for a startup as it is for any other enterprise. So having understood what finance is and having understood the fact that finance is important for a startup, the next question that comes to our mind is, what does finance really mean, and do I need to worry about it at such an early stage of my business? Like I said, and like we all are in the current stage, either we have just started or we are about to start, and is it kind of too early for us to think of finances? Very soon you will all be pitching to investors, you will have decks ready, you will at times be very probably differently attired, you will like to look your best when you are pitching to an equivalent of a Shark Tank, because without that money you will not be able to take the next step. But we also need to realize that, and like some of you engineers will know, that 1 degree of separation when you start from a point can lead you to a completely different destination. If my mathematics serve me right, if you start from Bangalore wanting to get to New York, and if you vary by a degree, just a degree, you will probably end up in Washington DC. And we know what that means, right? So if you have a goal and if you want to get to a point, if a degree of separation can mean so much of a difference, what can happen if you are, diverting by a significantly larger number of degrees? So I think as much as it is important to know what finance is and to know that finance is important for a startup, it is also important to start knowing about it from the day one. I can tell you as a practitioner, there are a lot of things which can happen in a matter of minutes and hours if you were to think of them when you are beginning your journey, versus a very painstaking, expensive effort as the time progresses. I have known of instances where companies did not think of a few small steps that they could have taken when they began, and that ended up costing them almost the whole enterprise. So I would tend to believe, and I would kind of like you to think about finances from the moment you think of starting a business, whether it is how you plan for what you want to do, whether it is what all you need to do to kind of get to your goals. Because as much as building the product, creating awareness, getting consumers, making transactions happen is important, as it is similarly important to make sure that you have all your variables kind of captured when it comes to finances. Most times when I interact with people who are a little bit advanced in their journey of running businesses, building businesses, I find them lacking in their understanding. Like they say, you don't know what you don't know. I would assume for people like you who are at the beginning of your journeys, it will be an interesting and an important insight to at least understand and be aware of what all finance can do, so that you are not in that phase where you don't know what you don't know. If you know what finance is, if you know what finance can do, I'm pretty sure you are intelligent enough to figure out when to leverage finance for what. So let's understand what finance means. One of the basic understandings of what finance means is, like I said, Munimji, making sure that there is a record of every financial transaction that's happening, whether it is making a payment, whether it is collecting money, whether it is investing somewhere, whether it is accounting for an expense, whether it is how much money is lying in the bank, whether it is creating a projection of how much money will be required or how much money got consumed. It also involves providing a report of how things were from a financial lens in the last 3 months, last 6 months, last 9 months to various stakeholders, whether it is the investors, whether it is the statutory obligations of reporting. So this is something that all of us understand, which is the Munimji and the compliance part of it. But finance is a lot more than that. Finance also means how do you structure your business so that you can get the best outcome when it comes to movement of money, when it comes to taxation, when it comes to availability of resources. At times, structuring can actually be the differentiator between you and your competition. Like they say, your credit rating is dependent on the country of place where you are operating from. So I don't know how many of you know, the sovereign rating of United States is different from the sovereign rating of, let's say, an Afghanistan. If you are the same company registered in Afghanistan versus registered in the United States, it impacts your credit rating. So understanding the structuring and then ensuring you structure yourself for an optimal outcome is a very critical element of what finance can do. Similarly, finance also means how do you create a business that will eventually deliver a financial return. You may not have a metric or you may not have the profitability to begin with, but you need to at least have a path to profitability. So finance is the function which will help you come up with that plan, which will help you evaluate the plans that are being presented to you, to figure out which one delivers that sustainable profitability and which one does not. Outcome of all of these three is the two-way conversation that finance can facilitate between the investors and your enterprise, so that you can learn from your investor on what the world is telling you, what's happening in the world, so that you can imbibe that in your own strategic planning. At the same time, give a coherent, thought through, financially understood plan presentation to your investors to give them the comfort that there is a return that they should expect. The return is not in the air, it is based on thought through planned assumptions. The assumptions are reasonable, realistic. There is a high degree of possibility that they will get delivered, and there is a regular monitoring and measurement of those metrics to make sure that we are on the right track to eventually deliver that goal. So finance is, like I said, not just about bookkeeping. It is not just about reporting. It is a lot more than that. It also means structuring the organization right. It also means making sure that the evaluation of building a sustainable enterprise plan exists, and eventually communicating externally with the investors who you need to know and who you need to make sure are convinced about your ability to deliver to that plan, so that you can get them to buy into your philosophy and invest in you. The most important and the basic building block of a great, productive, effective finance function is the bookkeeping function. Bookkeeping does not or is no more the same as it used to be some years back. I come from an era when accounting used to be all manual. It used to be an annual closing exercise. There used to be a comptist who would have a mechanical calculator to add up the numbers. If the trial balances added up, it would effectively mean that something has gone wrong. The most important person in the finance function those days used to be the guy who was with the comptometer, the calculator, so to speak. Today, systems have enabled an online real-time accounting, and people have forgotten the basic rules of accounting, and they have more focused on what entry to be made in the system, SAP. I think it is very important for an enterprise to understand what all is required to make sure that the accounting is proper. It is not just about the mechanics of it, it is also about the quality of it. So you need to make sure the financials there is a high integrity. So what is presented is a true and fair statement of facts. You are able to report and record at a granular level. Most of your businesses will like to know metric and cuts that are probably at an individual engineer level, that are at a product level, that are at a market level. So you need to build a system and an infrastructure that is able to capture that information and make sure that is able to provide you reports that you want to look at for running your business, which is typically what is called the management information system. It should not be mistaken with providing an Excel report. It should actually have actionable insights as well. So starting with building the infrastructure, having a team which will record the transactions appropriately to give a granular outcome at appropriate time intervals. And let me assure you, this is sounding much easier than it really is. But it requires a lot of effort in putting the right systems, in creating a discipline across all your user groups, which is your marketing function, your admin function, the engineering team, the HR team, so that inputs come on time to be able to provide proper financial statements. All of that, if done properly, will enable the next part of what I think is hygiene, is provide actionable insights with management reporting. What is actionable insight? It is where you have now collated the information, put it in a format, made deductions out of it to say this is going right, this is not going right, this is why this is going right, and this is why this is not going right. and hence what the business should continue doing, what the business should start doing, and what the business should stop doing. That in my mind is actionable insight. And the way it is communicated is not a financial language, it's a business language. So for example, if a business is currently operating in 7 cities and it now scaled to 35 cities thinking that this will give larger access to consumers and will grow the transactions, and you realized through management information system that the unit economics of those additional 28 cities is not working out, the management insight that the information report should provide should be saying that these 28 cities don't make sense. We should stop operations there, we should pull back the teams, and we should cut the investments because this is not unit economics positive. So what we typically think of hygiene, what we think of the basic of a finance function, which is putting the numbers together, is in itself much larger than that, which involves putting systems in place, defining processes in agreement and discussion with business users, which then get adherence, and ensuring that information is collected on time, assimilated appropriately, presented appropriately with management actionables, so that it actually becomes an actionable report and not just pointing fingers at saying what's going wrong and what's not going right. So all of this, which is reporting, recording, and creating actionable insights, in my mind is what I define as hygiene. This is what typically most accountants are known for. One of the key considerations for every enterprise is how do they structure themselves to be attractive to investors, to be tax efficient, to be able to deliver to all their consumers in the best possible manner, to be able to get visibility in the markets that they are in, and so on and so forth. Most enterprises, and especially those who are trying to build businesses for the first time, actually don't realize that finance can play a very critical role in making sure that the structure is appropriate. I don't know if you are aware, if you are a company registered in India, your ability to do a IPO anywhere outside of India is not there. You need to do a public listing in India. You can do an ADR or a GDR in the US, but that's not same as having a public listing in the US. Where you do your IPO has a significant bearing on what kind of investors you attract, how much capital you have access to. You will, either you already know it or you will very soon realize it, that obviously the investable surplus or the investment funds are much larger when you think of countries like the US and Europe versus, let's say, in India. Similarly, if you raised money in India and if you wanted to use that money to do any business outside of India, there is a significant operational procedure that you have to go through to remit even $100,000, even if you have the money lying in the bank, because that's the capital convertibility challenge that India poses. When you think of investors like the VC funds and the private equity funds in the US, their preference is to invest in companies which are registered in countries like Singapore in the US, because there is ease of operation, there is much lesser degree of difficulty in the movement of capital, and also of repatriation of the returns that has been earned on that investment. A combination of all of these factors actually have an impact on where you will register your company. Obviously, the cost of registration, the cost of managing a company in some of these countries is there, and where your eventual business is, where your eventual market is, also will be an important determinant. Let's say, for example, you are going to be a global company having markets all over the world. Your investors are going to be from all over the world, and you want to make sure that you have the full flexibility to operate in an environment that gives you the access to best talent, lowest tax cost structures, and the ability and flexibility to move money around. You can think of finance as that specialist who will look at the regulations of all the countries, whether it is monetary regulation, whether it is taxation, whether it is the incentives that you get by being in that country, and come up with a structure that enables you and creates a competitive differentiator, or at least avoids a competitive disadvantage by not doing something that your peer is doing, so that you have the best shot at building a most sustainable, flexible, scalable organization. To give an example, if you are registered in, let's say, Singapore, it gives you an option to list anywhere in the world. As a Singapore company, you can do an IPO in US, in Luxembourg, in London. There is no restriction. If you raise money, your investors will be very comfortable if it is in the country from where they are investing. So a Delaware company gets it very easily to kind of raise funds from US investors. From a corporate taxation perspective, you can actually negotiate the tax rates in Singapore. It can go as low as 7-8% compared to a 40% tax rate in India, or a 25-30% in the US, even after the reduction of taxation that Mr. Trump has done. The specialist in finance is the person who understands what all will come into play for you as a business, depending on which market you want to create your business in. And if you are going to be a company which has operations across multiple countries, which we just said was an example, then you can actually be having centered in Singapore without getting affected by the regulations like POEM and GAR in India, which requires your place of effective management to be in the country where your operations are. So it is extremely important that you don't rely on your own judgment without taking into account some of these factors when you are setting in this the structure of the company, and especially at what time you do it. I know of companies who have taken it easy in the beginning, and after the company has done reasonably well, 4 or 5 years down the line, they have done raise of 100 million plus. They are now valued at $300-400 million. And now they realize that ideal structure for them is not India but somewhere else. Unfortunately, at that point in time, when they are now trying to shift the center, when they are trying to move from India to another country, the valuation that they are at attracts a capital gain tax, and hence it becomes a very expensive proposition at that point in time, probably running into millions of dollars in some form of capital gains tax, if they want to now move away from the current origin or current registered country to a new country. So knowing what are the factors you need to take into account, keeping in mind what kind of business you want to be, what kind of markets you want to serve, which investors you want to raise money from right up front, so that you can structure it before even you have started the business, can actually be a significant impact to your financials versus if you were to do it at a much later point in time. So that's the specialist for you, and that's a significant impact that the specialist can make as a finance function, as a tax and treasury expert, to kind of make it much more scalable and flexible organization. Having taken care of the hygiene and the basic, having been the specialist who helps you structure the organization, finance also is your companion in the journey. At every step, at every moment, they are there to nag you, they are there to remind you that there is this unpopular guy who is going to ask you questions on why you are spending money. Don't assume, don't believe, don't think that once you have raised money and the investors have cut a check, you have a free ride and you can spend whatever money you spend. Finance and the CFO is the guy who is going to keep asking you difficult questions. That's their job. They are not there for the popularity contest. They are not there for being the nicest guy around. Probably that's reserved for the HR guy. The finance guy's job is to make sure that you are making the right calls. It is extremely important that you realize that finance function's job is to ask those tough questions. Whether you are wanting to spend $1 million on a marketing campaign, whether you are going to hire X number of engineers to invest in building a product, whether you are going to spend money in a market research, or you are wanting to build a sales and a marketing organization to kind of grow your transactions. This is what I define as the execution support of the finance function. A really effective business partnering finance organization will have a seat at the table, not because they are given the table seat, but because they have earned it. The business team should see them as the first port of call. They should not be an afterthought. The business team should actually see them as on the same side of the table. They should be in vendor negotiations, they should be in customer negotiations, they should be in investment decisions, they should be in the marketing conversations on where to put the money, whether it is, and let me assure you, finance guys are reasonably tech savvy. They understand what's the ROI on investment in Facebook versus Google, going to a digital channel versus a print media, investing in physical campaigns, creating a TV campaign, and so on and so forth. For a finance function to be able to effectively deliver on this goal, it is important that they do whatever is needed for the organization to feel them as a part of the organization, as a part of their team, and similar effort has to be made by the organization respective teams to include them in the conversations so that they can benefit from them being the bad cop. What do I mean by that? In every conversation, let's say you are a marketing lead in the company and you are negotiating a contract with a marketing agency. You have to deal with that marketing agency on a day-to-day basis, and you have to get them to do a lot of things. So how do you do the difficult conversation on pricing and costs with them? Leave it to the finance guy. Blame it on the finance. If you want to not do something, simply say that my CFO is the worst guy on earth. He doesn't approve. Use this function to blame this function for everything that you want the partner to do for you. So that's the execution part of what finance can do. While executing, you need to realize that finance also brings in a very interesting understanding of commercials and legal both. While finance guys are not lawyers, they are not expert in law, but a key part of the curriculum is to have a basic understanding of all laws that impact commercials. So when you are negotiating contracts, whether it is contract for an investment from an investor, whether it is contract for taking a debt, whether it is contract with a customer for a long-term arrangement, whether it is a licensing agreement with a vendor, in any such, or it is taking up a facility on lease, in any such contract negotiations, finance can actually bring in a lot of insights on how to make sure that you are managing your costs well. Whether it is in the form of long-term commitments that you are making, whether it is a form of risks that you are taking, and whether even if it is in the form of comparables versus what the rest of the world is paying for similar services. So execution and transaction support, hence, is a key value, is a key USP that finance function brings to the table and what it can do for an enterprise. Each person in the company is involved in one part of what's happening. It's probably only the finance guy who has a consolidated view of everything that is happening in the company that impacts the numbers. And we all know that how important numbers are. Some of us are driven by significant objectives which are other than finances, but even those cannot undermine the value of finance, or at least value of money. So this guy who has complete visibility of everything that is happening in the company also is competent enough by way of training to deduce what is going well and what is not going well. What will go well in the future is something that this guy becomes aware of by getting some insights about how the market is trending. When you think of China and you try to draw similarities with India, that country is in some ways far ahead of India, 15 years ahead probably in terms of GDP per capita. But on some other metric, they are probably at par, if not behind India. For example, the amount of GB of data usage per person. There are differences in regulations, there are differences in consumer behavior, there are differences in the freeness with which business can be done in some of these markets. And for a finance person to think of those in the metric across multiple geographies, multiple countries, multiple metric, and put those into assumptions and build a financial plan of the company for the future, he or she is best placed to give a projection of where the company is headed, can head if a few things were to be done, and hence come up with a fiscal plan for the company, which is why the planning process is largely driven by finance in most companies. And this becomes a very essential part of the conversation that has to be had with one key stakeholder of the company, which is the investor. This is the reason why I actually think of finance as the salesperson of the company to the investors. The salesperson is selling it to the consumer, marketing team is selling it to the industry and the people at large by building brand awareness. Finance guy is selling the company to the investor. The quality of that sales pitch, the investor getting convinced about the success of the company largely depends on the soundness of the financial plan that the CFO or the finance function comes up with after taking into account all those factors, after looking at how the company is doing today. And it becomes even more relevant for companies which are just starting and probably don't have visibility to profitability immediately, because a lot of what they are going to deliver is dependent on the future. This is the advisory role, this is the sales role of the finance function that is, in my mind, very less understood by most businesses, because if used well, this can go a long way in ensuring that there is investor confidence, there is investor trust, because this is also a two-way conversation. This builds transparency and it makes it a lot easier for the investor to put money into the company. Everything being the same, two businesses, a very strong advisory function of the finance function, which talks to investors, tells them what they are up to and understands from them and builds that into the strategy of the company, can go a long way in ensuring that the company never faces a capitalization challenge. Many a times we mistake a CFO with a person than a role. For a moment, if you were to think of everything that we discussed till now, what is finance, why is finance required right up front, what are the things finance can do, whether it is hygiene, whether it is the specialist, whether it is the advisor, or whether it is helping in working with the business in executing on a day-to-day basis. These are all roles that need to be played in the organization. Normally, we define the person who is entrusted with these roles as the CFO. But it does not necessarily mean that that CFO has to be someone who has some professional degrees and someone who has a chartered accountancy, a company secretaryship, or an MBA in finance. It could very well be someone who has the acumen to run all of this without having any degrees at all. It is also important that we define a DRI, a direct responsibility to an individual who is entrusted with the responsibility to ensure that someone is looking at these roles, or at least this aspect of business. Now, the moment we think of it that way, anybody or everybody who is responsible to ensure that this is taken care becomes a finance function or a CFO. I have seen companies where it's a two-man company, both are engineers, and all that they do is write codes and build a product. But one of them finds ways of spending time in talking to investors, in making sure that there is some accounting done of what money raised and how much was spent, and effectively that person is playing the role of a CFO. Understanding the distinction between the personality and the role is the first step at figuring out and understanding the importance of investing in that role. And when it comes to hiring an individual who is an expert at that, you need to take that call depending on where you are in your own life cycle. It's a call to be taken by the business depending on the competence of the people who are already there, whether they are professionally qualified or not, and the stage at which the company is. Stage does not necessarily mean series A, B, C, D, E. Depending on what business you are in and depending on what is the complexity of the business from a finance point of view, you need to decide whether you need to invest in hiring a specialist and the team that the specialist will need to deliver on the finance function, or you are better off giving that responsibility to someone as an add-on responsibility. And there is no right or wrong in this. It is completely contextual. It depends on the company, not even the industry or the business model. It is actually very, very contextual to the company. If you were to, for a moment, narrow it down to the startup world and think of what all are the considerations that should be there when you are deciding on the function, how it should look, what it should do, what should be the expectations of the function, I think you can broadly split into two parts. Things that everyone has to do, although it may be different in terms of scale, but at least that role has to be played. And then there are things which are dependent on either the stage that the company is in, or the business the company is in, or the market that the company is operating in, and so on and so forth. So let's come to the first part. Every company, and we have discussed this by now, every company, even if they don't have profitability today, they have to have a path to profitability. So what we are doing is we are moving away from a measure of profitability on a per transaction basis or a per day basis to maybe a per year or a few years point of view. So when companies say that I don't have profitability, how do I measure whether I am on the right direction or not? I think what they are saying is that they don't have profitability today, or maybe in the year or in the next year or in the next 3 years. But if you have to deliver to the investor expectation of return on investment, eventually on a cumulative basis, the enterprise has to deliver a certain return on the investment that has been made. So hence, the right way of thinking about it is the profitability duration has moved from a 1 year period or a 1 month period to maybe a 3 year, 5 year, 10 year horizon. The moment you understand that, and let's say it's a 10 year horizon, for you to be able to say that in 10 years you will make that much profits, you will need to build a plan to get to that 10 year profitability, which means that you can break that plan to milestones, and hence you can measure the metric that you want to measure, which will tell you that you are on path to hitting those milestones and eventually to that 10 year goal. So when you think of company which is currently not profitable at an overall level, but for every product that they sell they are making some profit, their unit of measure is how much profit they are making on per sale and how many units of sale is required to be able to make enough profits to pay for the fixed expenses so that the company becomes profitable overall, and have an understanding of whether that many units can be sold. Does the market exist? Is the market large enough to have that much of sale? And then monitor whether we are moving towards that goal of hitting that target and eventually becoming profitable. So having a path to profitability, which is a plan to get to path to profitability, and then monitoring that on a consistent basis, almost like every day, every moment, is a very basic thing that every finance function in every company has to do, whether it's a company that you are about to start or a company that you have just started. Integrity. It is extremely important to understand the role of integrity when you are building an enterprise. When you look at the market capitalization of companies, two companies with exactly the same performance on revenues and profits and growth, you are at times able to see that there is a significant difference in their market capitalization and the PE multiples because of the perceptible difference in corporate governance in those companies, which is nothing but a reflection of how investors think of integrity in those companies. It is extremely important that we understand that a company, for it to scale, for it to be sustainable, has to have high levels of integrity, what I define as unyielding integrity. And finance function or the CFO is the conscience keeper, is the person who is responsible to kind of make sure that there is complete fiscal integrity in the company. And this is something again that finance function has to deliver, irrespective of whether it's a one-day-old company or a 100-year-old company. Basic requirement of compliance, sales tax, excise, GST, all sorts of tax compliances, reporting to, if you are a US company, reporting to SEC, submitting your accounting on a quarterly basis, getting yourself audited by statutory auditors, all of that are the compliance requirements that finance function has to do. So this is what I define as what finance has to do irrespective of what company you are, where you are operating, which market you are in. Now if you come to specificities, if you are a complete digital platform, one of the companies I worked with is InMobi. It's a digital ad network, the largest third-party ad network in the world. We were trying to compete with the Facebooks and the Googles of the world sitting in India. Fairly successful, I would say, in getting there. The uniqueness of the model was everything was online, everything was digital. You could monitor transactions, you could almost measure the revenue on a per minute basis. Invoicing was automatic, the collections were all electronic. So that requires a very different set of capabilities and a different set of processes to be able to account for collections, billing, receivables, and so on and so forth. Versus, let's say, a Flipkart or an e-commerce company, which has to buy inventory, which has to manage warehouse, which has to deliver goods. At times the consumer is paying it online at the time they place the order. At times the consumer is actually paying to the person who is going to deliver the product, which is called cash on delivery. And just imagine the complexity that it brings. You have to now suddenly do inventory management, you have to do returns management, you have to do cash management, somewhere it is collected cash. And by the way, for you to ensure that every transaction is accounted appropriately, you have to have teams which are doing reconciliations. So suddenly the finance function from a 8 to 9 member team becomes a 150 to 200 member team, right? It brings in complexities of putting controls and checks so that there is no fraud. People are not just running away with cash. Imagine business did a great number of transactions, made profit per transaction, but the person who is collecting the cash just ran away. So the business is not viable. So that requires a very different type of function. Now think of a company which is working across multiple countries, which is, let's say, InMobi was working across 53 countries. Suddenly you have now collections happening in different currencies. Someone is paying in euros, somebody is paying in dollars, somebody is paying in dirhams, somebody is paying in won. Each country has their own requirement for you to move the money out. So there is a very complex understanding of individual country regulations. You have to manage the currency risk. Imagine managing rupee versus dollars, and suddenly now you have to manage 53 currencies versus 53 currencies. And how well you manage that will govern how profitable you are. If you kept all your money in a currency which is continuously depreciating, even if everything else went well, just the forex loss will make your company loss-making company. So a company which has an operation like that has to invest in people who understand these currency movements, who are able to take the right calls, who are able to monitor that regularly, who are knowledgeable about what factors to keep in mind, how they can maximize the exchange rate that they effectively get, without getting into making some very complex derivative transactions that can completely wipe out the capital itself. So the understanding of the factors that govern the kind of finance structure that you will put in place either is known by an expert who is typically the CFO, or you can reach out to experts. There are organizations like KPMG, EY, who can understand your organization, who can understand the processes, who can understand the need, and then recommend what kind of investments you need to make in the finance function. You can choose to do some of it in-house by hiring people, you can outsource part of it, but I think the beginning of that process is in understanding what you need to do and then taking help in executing it. Like I said, I don't know what I don't know. So becoming aware is the beginning of it. Knowing what you have to do, irrespective of what business you are in, and depending on what scale of operations you are, investing appropriately in that, and then making sure that you invest in what you need specifically so that you can create it as a competitive advantage rather than competitive disadvantage, will go a long way in building fiscal prudence in the company, in making sure that you use this as an advantage and not as a weakness. I define success as delivering to your commitments. You have multiple constituencies that you are dealing with in life, whether it is family, whether it is office, whether it is investors, whether it is your in-laws, whether it is your parents, and making sure that you are delivering to every commitment that you make is what I define as success. I'm sure as entrepreneurs, you make commitments to multiple constituencies, and for you to ensure that you deliver to what you commit will be what I think is success. Failures, unlike what most people believe is the end of the road, is for me the beginning of the road. It is highly unlikely and improbable that you will try to do something and you will succeed at the first attempt. So you need to be prepared for persevering, trying it again and again, and eventually make a success out of it. Personally, have I had failures? Enough of them. And each time I had a failure, I came out stronger. Whether it was my application to US colleges in the days when you couldn't afford to even pay for the application fees, and having tried it multiple times and failed at it, I eventually got into a much better college near home. Or it was about inability to convince my wife to join me at the campus, which led to sleeping only 4 hours, and from then on for 15 years I survived with just 4 hours average sleep per day. So there are enough such examples. The way you think about failures and the way you take the benefit of the failure is what will define how stronger you become. As entrepreneurs, let me assure you, you will have multiple failures, and there are enough and more examples of those who have failed again and again. In fact, failed entrepreneurship has become very sought after competence nowadays. And eventually those who persevere and who learn from those failures have come out as winners. What I realized very early in life is people make resolutions and it's extremely hard and find it difficult to kind of ensure they live up to the expectations. And I wanted to make sure that I became healthier. I was one of those kids who was always ill, who was always under the weather, and it impacted everything in life. And how do I do this? So I came up with this very interesting model where I created a fail-safe plan. What was the fail-safe plan? So I said to myself that unless and until I had my prayers, I will not eat anything in the morning or in the day at all. Until and unless I have had a bath, I will not do my prayers. Until and unless and I will only bathe in cold water. And unless I had my exercise, I will not have my bath. First day, second day, third day, and I pushed myself, I forced myself, and like they say, in few days it became muscle memory. So it's been now close to 2 decades, and I haven't had a day when I haven't my exercise, I haven't had a cold water bath, and I haven't done my prayers before I ate in the morning. In these 20 years, I haven't had a need to wear a jacket. I haven't had a cold or a flu. And I have had a constant weight of 67 kgs. Make sure that your plan is not dependent on you pushing yourself, convincing your mind about doing something which generally is not very comfortable. You are almost for sure going to fall prey for what your mind needs, which is typically comfort, luxury, and being in the comfort zone. And as entrepreneurs, if you are going to take big, difficult, hairy goals, as they say, you need to make sure that you have a fail-safe plan. So I was this young, just passed out chartered accountant attending a meeting which was presided over by one of the richest person in the country at that point in time. I was representing the business unit along with my CEO for the business unit, and I was so awestruck by the whole conversation that I was largely hearing what was being spoken in that conference room. It was a 3-hour meeting, and I probably didn't utter a word. At the end of the 3-hour meeting, when I was walking out of that meeting, and I saw someone put his hand on my shoulders and make a very simple statement, and all he said was, "If you don't speak, you will not be heard." And this was nobody other than the richest person in the country, and since then I haven't stopped speaking. I think it is very important for us to understand, especially when we are people who have a point of view, we are people who have an opinion on a matter, that when there is an opportunity, obviously in the right way, it is extremely important to express our point of view. We don't have a reason to be in a conversation or in a meeting if we just listen and don't share our perspective. Sharing a perspective helps you correct your own perspective, helps others understand your perspective, and it goes a long way in defining you and in defining how you think, what you do, and how you do things in life. So in my mind, a simple but a very profound statement that unless you speak, you will not be heard was probably the best advice I got in my life. Failure is a part of life, perseverance takes you through. Make sure that you are building what the consumer needs, and don't expect what you will build will get sold. Number 2, if you think you need to do something, do it today. Don't delay it, don't push it out for later. Number 3, understand that it is an extremely hard and difficult journey, multiple failures and maybe only one success. Raising the money is the beginning of it, it's not the end of it. I have only one hobby, and that is running. I've been running for 24 years, and my family knows that if I have time and if I'm not at home, at office, then I'm running. I think the support of the family and knowing that there is someone who thinks about me more than I think about myself, I think is a big support. As they say, if you do what you enjoy, then you are never working, you are always enjoying. I have been working very hard is what all my friends and peers tell me, sleeping 3-4 hours. I have never felt a victim. I've always enjoyed every bit of what I have done, and the moment we define work-life balance as working only X number of hours, I think we are making a mistake. What we should make sure is we choose to do what we enjoy doing, and then we will never have problems or complaints about having overworked. I think the second very important thing is, it is not about what you deliver, it is about how you deliver against expectations. And I'll give you a simple example, and you should try it out in your own lives. In the morning when you leave for office at 7:30, 8, tell yourself that you will get back home by 6:30 and actually get back at 7 o'clock. On another day, leaving at the same time in the morning, tell yourself I'll get back only at 11 in the night and get back at 10:30. and then compare which day you felt better. I can bet you would have felt better the day you came back at 10:30. So it is not about you coming back at 7 versus 10:30. It is about whether you came earlier than what you planned for. In life, when you set expectations which are realistic, you set expectations which you will 100% achieve and meet, you will find normally that work-life balance is a question that you will never even think about. My dad and Mr. Azim Premji, in that order. If there is one thing that human beings could avoid doing, which is compare yourself with others, gain happiness from our achievements versus what we planned. We should take aggressive goals, deliver on those goals, but not to say that I want to be bigger than that guy, I want to be famous compared to that person, I want to be richer than that person. This relative comparison is, in my mind, the root cause for most unhappiness. And if we can get away from that, and if we were to look back, I'm sure we have enough reasons to count our blessings.